Hello and welcome to the Power Engineering International Power Hangout, where the topic for this edition is electricity storage. The wind and solar power industries make great claims each week on news media about feats of capacity. For example, in the past week alone came the headline, Germany already has more green power than it ever had nuclear. The headline was prompted in response to Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York's assertion that Americans will be reading by candlelight unless nuclear is subsidized. Cuomo was pointing to the German nuclear power phase-out as a way of reinforcing his point. Morris, a commentator on Renew Economy website, countered with evidence of Germany's renewable power capability. Trying to extract facts from the barrage of cheerleading involved in each industry is an occupational hazard. I say that any claim about the benefits or capacities of solar and wind should come with an asterisk. Storage is now the technology in the spotlight, and you could even call it the superhero technology that's going to save humanity and the world from itself and consign fossils to the past. For this hangout, my guest is Dr. Jill Caney, Director of the Electricity Storage Network. Good morning, Jill.
Good morning.
How are you this morning?
Everything is good, and I liked your comment about electricity storage being the superhero.
Yes.
Here.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of talk about superheroes these days, but I think without storage, I mean, renewables, it's like a missing leg, really. Just the first question I want to ask you, Jill, with all this claim and counterclaim going on between all the technologies, whether renewable, nuclear or fossil, isn't it fair to say that without the accelerated development of storage technology, there will continue to be an asterisk beside renewables, whatever its proponents might expound? I mean, I can see there that according to the Renewable Energy Policy Network 21's 2016 report, just 2.2% of global electricity came from wind, solar, geothermal and biomass power last year. So, I mean, what do you think of that, what I refer to as an asterisk over the claims about renewables?
Yeah, certainly if you don't have flexibility in your system because you don't always have the sun shining and you don't always have the wind blowing, how are you going to cover those times when you've got too much of either resource or too little of either resource to keep the lights on? So, security of supply is a concern, and storage is one of the answers to providing that flexibility. Demand side response is also one of the answers to providing that flexibility. The electricity system in GB has always been designed around you and I, the consumer, being able to turn on whatever we want, whenever we want, and generation responds, but that's not the type of generation we have anymore. And indeed, nuclear is inflexible. It just has to do maximum output. So if you have more nuclear on the system, you need additional flexibility, which is something that storage can provide. So I think storage is definitely something that the system needs. There are a large number of reports that have been published this year from the Carbon Trust and the National Infrastructure Commission that have built on other reports that state just how important storage is to delivering that secure, economic and low carbon system in the UK.
Okay. I mean, there's a lot of excitement at the rate at which innovation is reducing the cost of storage, if you're to believe the headlines. I mean, what is the real story here? Is this too optimistic yet, or to consider batteries, for example? Are they inexpensive enough to really matter, or is it just part of an incremental, over time, it will become more and more apparent how... I mean, you quoted an interesting statistic to me earlier before this broadcast about how much 1 megawatt of storage can displace. So, I mean, it is true to say that the costs might be a stick to beat storage exponents with, but at the same time, for the technology that is being introduced, it does have a remarkable effect on the scene.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the focus has largely been on lithium ion because that's an established technology. The cost curve was coming down quite nicely. It's actually accelerated because of the National Grid Enhanced Frequency Response Tender. So people were preparing their bids, they were putting pressure on suppliers, and one manufacturer has said that the steady downward gradient in the costs of lithium ion has accelerated, and rather than 10% in 6 months, they've seen 40% in 6 months. And that's just because our system operator has wanted a particular service, a particular type of technical service that a battery can provide. Obviously, batteries are not the only technology that is available, and there are many other technologies. So, there is this myth that we're all waiting for the superhero of electricity storage to arrive on our system and save us from blackout. But we actually have electricity storage in the UK. We have 3 gigawatts of pumped hydro energy storage, which we've had since the early 80s. Obviously, that was built under a different regime because that was built for the nation and we all essentially paid for it. That's not going to happen again, I don't think. It's much more likely that developers are going to have to build individual projects. But, flywheels, we have flywheels in the UK operating, keeping data centers up. Flywheels are a high capacity but very short duration technology. So they don't provide capacity, but they provide enough to keep something going until your diesel genset kicks in, say, to keep critical infrastructure up. They're well established. They've been around for many, many years. We've got compressed air energy storage. So Gaia Electric in Northern Ireland moving ahead with their project for compressed air energy storage. That's a long duration, high capacity storage like pumped hydro. You've got batteries, which can range from a small amount very quickly to a longer duration, but they're never going to be a day at high capacity. So, and then you've got things like liquid air energy storage, so Hive-use technology, where they use excess electricity to compress air and store it as liquid nitrogen, and then you expand that out through a gas turbine to make electricity. Okay. So there are many, many different types of technologies. Most of them are well developed. Batteries are getting all the attention, mainly because of Elon Musk and his factory and his Tesla Powerwall. But we do have many UK players in that same space who have been working really hard for many years to deliver behind-the-meter storage.
I mean, some of them, I suppose, some of the technologies have great benefits, as you mentioned, and some. I know the ARPA program in the Department of Energy in the US they're putting a lot of money and resource into that now. But I mean, some of the traditional technologies you speak about that have been around for some recent and some not so recent. I mean, for example, pumped storage. I mean, it's a superb means of producing power, but is it kind of handicapped by its it has to be geographically appropriate, or
So there is the potential for another. I think it is 3 gigawatts of pumped hydro in the UK. That's upgrading existing just hydroelectric stations. So you'd need a bottom lake in order to store the water to pump it back up. But there have been proposals from a number of the Scottish energy companies to do those upgrades. But the problem is they're very expensive. There's a lot of capital up front. You've got the environmental impacts, and without some sort of strategy or encouragement, it will be difficult for those type of large technologies to deliver the resources that are actually there. There's a company called Quarry Battery who are looking at smaller scale pumped hydro using old quarries to provide the upper and lower lakes, and they've got a project around 100 megawatts. So there's lots of potential. It's very difficult to get it off the ground in the sort of uncertain economic environment and environmental impacts and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that because you see people who point to Norway or Switzerland and I suppose those places have natural advantages that maybe aren't present in other flatter landscapes. Another, I suppose, another quite much talked about technology is zinc air batteries. They seem to be a lot. Again, there's a lot of work being done on those, but are they a contender yet on a utility scale?
So there are lots of different types of batteries, including flow batteries, and zinc air could be a flow battery, or it could be, I think, a conventional battery. So it sort of straddles both camps. So a flow battery, you have a small cell, but you have large tanks of electrolyte, which you pump through the cell, and you can either recharge it in the conventional way, or you can put new electrolyte in. So when they were originally developed, they were believed to be the answer to mobile electricity storage, so cars, because you could fill up the tank, the electrolyte tank, just like you fill up your petrol tank. However, the tanks are a bit large and cumbersome, so they're a bit difficult to move around. So there are lots of other battery chemistries, and there's a lot of work going into different chemistries, different components, because what you want is essentially something like Denoig, a large pumped hydro scheme, but compressed down into the size of your telephone battery.
Yes.
That's all about energy density. How much energy can you squash into a small space? And batteries still don't offer the same sort of energy density as something like other technologies. So that's a critical thing, because they have a limited capacity. They run out. That's a fact of life with batteries that we're all very familiar with.
Yes.
So
I mean,
yeah. So
yes,
one of the things when you were talking about the asterisks earlier is, do we need interseasonal storage? How do we move all that nice solar energy in summer to where we need it in winter? And so if you had storage, it might be heat storage rather than electricity storage, that you could fill up in summer and then use in winter, that may help you bridge the huge energy increase that we see in winter. So in the UK, our gas use in winter is 300 gigawatts over our summer use. And there's no way that our electricity system in the UK is ever going to be able to provide 300 gigawatts of electricity in the winter. So how do you build a system that can deliver the heat we're going to need in winter without storage?
Okay. Just a couple of other probably lesser known technologies. Compressed air energy storage. Is that a solution that's viable, or is it again its development possibly considered too expensive?
So that's again a very large, that's a large energy storage asset. It's a well-established technology. There's been a plant operating in Germany for many, many years. The difficulty is you have to have, a bit like pumped hydro, suitable geology. You have to have the salt cavern, etc., in order to pump it up and store the air. There are companies looking at smaller type arrangements. So you could imagine filling up a gas cylinder and compressing that, but that's much smaller scale. And one of the advantages of compressed air energy storage is it's a larger scale, long duration energy storage technology, but you're limited by where you can go. Obviously, we've got our gas and oil fields, which gas store. And I guess the other problem is at the moment it's much more economic. If you have a space that you can fill with a gas, you're going to put methane in it rather than air.
I see.
But there are locations which could be used, but they're being used for something else at the moment.
Okay. I suppose, one of the ones I encounter quite frequently are hydrogen fuel cells. They're very successful, it seems, with data centers, but maybe a bit unwieldy a technology at the moment to exist at utility scale.
Yeah, I mean, the hydrogen economy and the coming of hydrogen, the efficiency of using electricity to electrolyze water to make hydrogen, storing that hydrogen and then putting it back through a fuel cell to get electricity is very inefficient at the moment. So it's sort of 30% efficient, that whole round trip. Perhaps moving hydrogen and burning it as a replacement for methane is an option. So rather than making it into electricity or perhaps using it for transport is again a better option. But we do have to remember that the production of combustion of hydrogen is water vapor, and water vapor is our primary greenhouse gas. So the hydrogen economy is not climate neutral. It's not a greenhouse gas that we talk about, because water vapor is a very tricky beast, because obviously it's to do with humidity and evaporation and so on, but it is major greenhouse gas. And would all of us driving hydrogen cars, say, and burning hydrogen for our heating and our cooking, what impact would that have on climate change? And I don't think we fully understand that at the moment.
I mean, is that something you see in the UK, like in universities? Are they researching just how, I suppose, the pros and cons of that technology still, or is it sort of being at a large scale? Then it's still going to, its niche is the whole area of data centers, I suppose.
I mean, I often say that hydrogen is a solution in search of a problem.
Right.
And there's no doubt that if you have excess electricity, you want to do so. So you've got lots of wind or you've got lots of sun. What are you going to do with that electricity that you can't use at that particular moment in time? Do you constrain off the wind turbines and lose that energy, or do you store it, or do you convert it to something else that you can store, such as hydrogen? Electrolysis of water is a very energetic process. It's not the most energetically favourable way to produce hydrogen. It is one of the ways to produce hydrogen that isn't reliable on the fossil fuel industry. So potentially it's a cleaner source of hydrogen. But we use hydrogen as a feedstock for many of our chemical processes. So the question is, when you make hydrogen, should you be using it to remake electricity at a later date? Should you be burning it in an engine or a fuel cell or in your cooker? Or should you be putting it back into industry to make other things? And what is the best use of hydrogen? And certainly in Europe, there's a big push for the hydrogen economy. And I think there's a lot of research on hydrogen. It hasn't yet found the solution. What can it deliver?
Okay. I mean, what can you tell us about molten salt in tandem with solar? Is that does that have credentials that fuel cells doesn't have?
Molten salt is relatively early, I think. It's still a development technology. Again, you're putting in a lot of energy to melt the salt, and then when it re-solidifies, you get some, you're going to get energy out. It's a possibility, but there are lots of things being researched in universities in the UK in terms of chemistry, different approaches, batteries, flow batteries, and so on, but they're not yet commercial. And the problem is at the moment that lithium ion is king. The lithium ion battery is not the answer to every question in our electricity system. So you can't just say, oh, that's it, we've got lithium ion batteries, job done, we can all relax. You do have to also be thinking about the other technologies that you need to bring on for the future, for the.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's such a new. I mean, obviously, it probably goes back centuries. Uh, I suppose, research into how to store electricity. But I mean, it is relatively recent that there's been such a huge impetus on it. When I suppose renewables, um, it's renewables Achilles tendon, isn't it? Or Achilles heel. How it stores that energy when it isn't, when the sun isn't shining, or the wind isn't blowing. I suppose, because it's so early in its development, there are probably technologies being worked on now that are going to completely blindside us as well.
So there are undoubtedly technologies that are coming in the future that we don't know about or fully understand at the moment. But at the moment, the issue is that we have a grid where we've incentivized the connection of variable generation, so wind and solar, but we haven't incentivized anything else to help us manage that. We haven't even incentivized the building of more network so that we can put more of this stuff on. So we find that our existing network is kind of creaking under the strain of managing all these reverse power flows, because the UK system was designed for large scale central generation trickling down to all the users at the bottom. It was never envisaged that users at the bottom would be their own generators. And so the system is not able to cope. And so how do you facilitate using what we do have in the most efficient and cost-effective way? And that's with flexibility, which is storage and demand-side response.
Okay. Before we get to the UK, I suppose one of the more common storage technologies that I've encountered over the last years is flywheel. There seems to be, I mean, it isn't shouting loudly about what it can do. Is there a reason for that? Or is it something, again, it's too early in its development, and maybe that some of the things that hinder it might be overcome?
It's very, frustrating to hear that it's early in its development, because flywheels have been around for hundreds of years.
Right.
Victorians use them.
Yes.
So, and we have two very large flywheels at Culham that arc up a plasma. So we do have flywheels in the UK. My partner works in IT. His data center in Bristol is kept up with flywheels while the genset kicks in. So they are being used. They're just not receiving a great deal of attention. I think the issue is we focus a lot on longer duration technologies. We're not very interested in technologies that are very quick and then that's it. They discharged fully, which is what a flywheel is good at. So they're well established. People wouldn't be securing their data on a flywheel if they didn't believe that they were, secure, because nobody wants to lose their data. Data is the thing today. So you don't want that to disappear. And if people are prepared to use flywheel, and they are, then that shows you how reliable they really are.
Is it possible for flywheel to work in tandem or as a hybrid with another storage object?
Yeah, so, things where you want, say, like the enhanced frequency response, which is a sub 1 second response required from the system operator, you could put a flywheel on. So De Norwig, which is our largest storage asset in the UK, takes 5 to 6 seconds to respond. So when you press the button, you've got to wait 5 to 6 seconds for it to deliver its capacity. The system needs faster and faster response because we no longer have what we call inertia. So we don't have those nice big spinning bits of metal that act as a sponge to mop up any problems on our grid. So National Grid want faster resources, and flywheels are one of those resources. So you could envisage something like a pumped hydro plant hooked up to a flywheel to give you that rapid response while you're longer duration and higher capacity kicks in behind it. And people are developing hybrid solutions. Even in different battery technologies, you have faster responding but lower capacity with longer duration, other longer duration batteries. So you could have two types of battery to shape a service that you want to deliver. So I think we're probably going to see more hybrid solutions to ensure that we can support the system in the way we want.
I mean, can you envisage a scenario where the hybrid solution is the norm? That's the proliferated technology.
I think at the moment the lithium-ion battery can do what's needed, but as we move forward and we lose more spinning reserve and inertia, we're going to need even faster response. And then it will be things like perhaps capacitors and supercapacitors and flywheels that will have a role, but they'll need to be hooked up to something else to give duration. Yeah, so I think where we are in the system at the moment and what the system needs, we have a solution that fits. As time moves forward, that solution may not be enough, and we might have to use a hybrid solution.
Okay. Turning to the UK in particular, I suppose we've had momentous events have occurred since we last spoke in 2015. The National Grid's enhanced frequency response tender from last week, of course, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Back in 2015, he spoke of the little niggly things that happen when storage isn't defined. Do you think the UK is more coherent now in what it wants from storage and policy, I suppose, announcement and auctions tell us?
Yeah, so I guess the government and the regulator now have a much better understanding of what the problems are with electricity storage. And when we spoke in 2015, we didn't have any teams in Ofgem or what was then DEC working on storage. We do now. So there are storage teams in both organisations. There are storage teams in National Grid. So we've kind of moved from where it was this mythical thing that was far out that might be interesting one day to something that everybody is now looking at. And BIS and Ofgem are working really hard to resolve the regulatory issues, and they've been hoping to publish a call for evidence since May, but with all the political excitement that we've been going through since May, that has been delayed. But that will look at, do we need a definition? Should we have a license? And who can own and operate electricity storage? And I should say that Europe, even though we may or may not be in Europe, also has a key influence. And one of the key codes, market codes that operates in Europe, so that's the EU third package, is due for revision, and the proposed amendments are due to be published in December. And in mid-September, there's a resolution before the EU Parliament, which will consider how much of those amendments should incorporate storage. And at the moment, that would include a new asset class for storage, a definition for electricity storage, and that would provide the clarity that we need. And also, they call for the resolution of unfair taxing, use of system charges, and how we apply our levies in the UK, which means storage has to pay, essentially the consumer pays twice, just from an accident of storage not being defined.
Okay.
So that hasn't really progressed, but that hasn't held people back from bidding into EFR. Developers will always want to get projects on the ground, and they're prepared to accept the uncertainty. Indeed, in America, where they've been supporting energy storage for a lot longer than we have and actively supporting it, so they have specific targets for delivery of storage in the US. They haven't regulated either. They've just made a clear statement that they're going to be pragmatic They want this technology on the system, and so long as you're behaving appropriately, i.e. not gaming the system or doing bad things that will impact on the consumer, they will be supportive and not sort of dot every I and cross every T in terms of the regulation. But it is a problem that it's defined as generation as a default at the moment, just because it's not defined as anything else. And that impacts how we treat it in terms of planning, rates, connecting, and so on.
And would you anticipate, the Business Infrastructure Commission, that new body that's trying to coordinate proper strategy for all aspects of British society, but in particular large infrastructure? And would you anticipate, I know they have spoken about this, but they're bringing out their official policy on energy next year. So would you anticipate storage being part of that conversation, and would you think that clarity might emerge from that?
So I think the National Infrastructure Commission, in their Smart Energy report in May, clearly stated that by incorporating energy storage onto the system, we could save up to £2.4 billion in the operation of that system. The Carbon Trust published a report at the same time which suggested up to £8 billion of reduced costs. So there's a very good understanding that by putting storage into your system, you reduce the costs of running that system. And indeed, government and the regulator recognise that and want to facilitate it, but there are still lots of niggly problems. So when we last talked, there were lots of niggly problems, and as time goes on, we discover lots more little niggly problems because storage wasn't thought about when we wrote, say, our contract for difference rules or our renewable obligation rules. So what we like to think of as the ideal partnership between renewable generation and storage is currently hampered because the incentive regime doesn't facilitate that. You may lose your incentive, or it complicates securing your incentive if you partner with storage on your site, and government are working very actively to try and resolve that, so that partnership can come forward, because they recognise that if you're already generating, you've got land and you've got a connection, so that is an economy that you can make in the deployment of storage. But we haven't got there yet. We're still sort of tinkering around the edges. We haven't got the final solution. So it's still a little bit frustrating, but people are still getting on with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is encouraging to see that despite the obstacles there, that there has been progress made. It must be encouraging for you and those around you. Just to preface my last question, at a recent Financial Times Future Energy Scenarios conference, Sharif Abdel-Messi, Chief Executive Officer of the Future Energy Corporation, told an audience of power professionals, when you merge solar and wind generation with energy storage, so renewables are no longer intermittent and it reaches the same cost as gas and coal, when that happens, it's game over. Just to show how polarized opinions were at that event, Christoph Ruhl, who's a global head of research at Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, said, if you look at the numbers, renewables amount to about 3% of the global energy mix. Even if conditions allow them to grow to 8 to 10%, much faster than the growth we have seen, they will still not dominate the system 20 years from today, short of a major technology breakthrough falling from the sky. Just given all that, there was more information emerged this week from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which forecast annual investment in energy storage will increase sixfold to 8.2 billion in 2024, and that by 2024, roughly 45 gigawatt of energy storage will be installed throughout the world, excluding pumped hydro. To conclude, how do you, given all that information, sorry, that's a lot of information to throw at you. I'm sure you're familiar with it anyway, Dr. Caney. How do you see the global electricity market looking in 50 or perhaps a century's time? I know it's a crystal ball situation, but what do you see when you look into that crystal ball?
So, I mean, I guess even in the UK, we have days where renewable energy provides more of our demand than coal,
Mhm.
and is getting to the point where it can provide nearly all of our demand. That's on certain days at certain times. It's not consistent. So it does have a large impact, and how it's this battle between the old incumbent centralized system, between what we now have as a decentralized electricity system, and who is going to win that battle. Are we still going to see large centralized assets, or are we going to move to a sort of grow your own energy type approach where it's all decentralized? And we're in the middle of that battle where the big parties are not very happy at the new technologies and their potential impact on their market share and how they operate, and that extends even down to National Grid, our transmission system operator, understanding that they really need to know what's going on behind every front door if they're going to adequately manage the system. But should they be doing that, or should the distribution network operator move to being a distribution system operator and take responsibility for balancing their little bit of the network and leaving National Grid with just the 3 to 5% residual balancing task, which is a massive decrease in sort of their their business. And that's going on throughout the energy system. So we talked a little bit earlier about gas plant. In the old days, gas plant was baseload. It was clattering away at 80% all the time. Now gas plant is off, and then only on when we don't have solar and wind, and it's becoming very difficult for gas plant to run economically, because the system is radically different from what we set up originally. And because everything is actually decentralized at the distribution network, I think we're going to start seeing, the smart grid, the microgrids, sort of local energy. And I'm a climate scientist by background, and that makes sense to me because as climate change, as the atmosphere warms, you have more energetic storms, stronger winds, and more rain. And more you need to think about resilience, and the way you build a resilient network is you have redundancy and you have little pockets that can operate alone rather than something central that once you break a bit off, that's it. So I think we are seeing a difficult and awkward transition to the distributed energy system, where you and I will think more about how we make our own energy, how we store that energy, and how we use that energy. And we'll have a direct role in looking after our own networks.
Okay. So if I read you properly, this is your money is on the decentralized energy, on distributed generation winning the day.
Yes, I'm going to place my bets
Okay.
on the decentralized system.
Okay, well, I mean, that's great. I mean, I'm going to get down to the bookmakers immediately, and I'm going to try and get them to open a book on that one. But as we have seen, as we've heard today, speaking to Dr. Caney, there's a lot of polarization of opinion about, whether storage can be the superhero technology that humanity needs it to be, and by and large, it's a very positive momentum behind it now. Dr. Jill Caney, thank you very much for talking to me today, and we hope to hear more about the technology over the coming year.
All right, thank you.
Thanks very much.